Right. Apologies for absence. I've got Lee Baker, Theo Buck-Phillips, Francis Nicholson and Evelyn Stacey. Is there anybody else? No, is there? No. Declarations of interest? I have none. Robin?
No. Not for this.
Chris? Interest? No.
No.
Stephen? Brilliant, that's quickly done. Chairperson's announcements, amazingly, I have none. Minutes from the last meeting, we need to approve as correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of April. Thank you very much. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Mike. All those in favour? And then we need to go through each page, so we'll do that as normal. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Oh, that's right, it was a really short meeting, wasn't it? So where is it all? No, it was a short meeting. I have no items of urgency. We have no public speakers. And so we're going to go straight to item 7, external audit arrangement. We've got somebody with us from our external auditor, but I'm going to go to Ben.
Thank you, Chairman. Please can I introduce Grace Hawkins, Audit Director for Grant Thornton, to present this item to you.
Good morning, everyone. Could I just check that you can hear me okay? Yeah. That's great. Thank you. So we have our audit plan for the 24-25 financial year on the agenda today. Exmoor National Park is in a fortunate position as we are up to date on all of our prior year audits, so there's no impact of the local government backstop that was implemented by the government to enable us to close down audits in a more timely manner. So that puts us in a great position coming into this year. Our planning work has progressed really well as well, and we've been working with Ben and the finance team to bring forward some early testing to ease some of that pressure at the final accounts visit as well. So thank you to Ben and the team for that. I will take the report as read, but just highlight a few key pages. So firstly, the significant risks which we've identified are on pages 15 and 16 of our report. These are consistent with what you've seen in the prior year, with risk covering the presumed risk of management override of controls, the valuation of the pension fund liability and the valuation of your property, plant and equipment. You will note, however, another risk on page 17, and this relates to the implementation of IFRS 16. So this relates to leases, and this has become mandatory for all local government bodies for 24-25 financial year. So the key risk for us is whether this disclosure is complete and all of the leases have been captured. So that's the key bit of our work. And then if it is material to the accounts, we'll then do further work on that once that's concluded. Our approach to materiality is outlined on page 20 and 21. So you will note the percentage applied has increased since the prior year. This is just due to some internal guidance that's been updated, and we have applied the maximum 2.5% that we can, because we don't consider there to be any specific risks within the control environment at Exmoor National Park. Our value for money assessment is outlined on page 27, and at this stage we haven't identified any risks of significant weakness. I'm pleased to say we've got quite a consistent team that's delivering the work, and the logistics and the time frame for this is outlined on page 29. And this will take place from September with the aim to conclude by Christmas this year, and that is well in advance of the February backstop date in 2026. So we're hoping to get ahead of that and keep us on track to have a clean opinion going into the next year. Those are the key highlights, but happy to take any questions on the detail if there are any.
Thank you, Grace. Members. Andy.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Just a generic question as you're here, I'll ask it because I do it always. I do wish on these reports for public consumption that you put a sort of exec summary at the beginning of them. It's something I've asked for a number of years, and I would love to see you doing it. I feel it's fine though, but I would just leave that with you because I think it's quite difficult with a lot of generic information that will flow through to every single person you deal with. You know, a lot of it is generic and not specific, perhaps to Exmoor National Park. And I think it'd be helpful to highlight the sort of points of interest, like you've done now at the top or heading of the reports. I've asked for it for years and I will keep asking. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your feedback.
Okay, so what we're actually doing is receiving a plan. So can I have a proposal, please? Thank you, Robin. A second, Mandy. All those in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much, Grace.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the rest of your day.
You too. Thank you very much. See you soon.
And we're going to stay with then the medium-term financial plan. Oh, sorry, please.
I'm just going to, in one of the articles I read with great interest, I have to say, looking at the budget, a balanced budget is reported in the MTFP 25-26. However, further savings are required. I couldn't find enough information about what types of changes we are looking at. And can we put that somewhere in the future to have a bit more of a look at what sort of savings we're actually looking to find?
I think that's going to be in the item we're about to do now.
Okay, that's fine. Well, I'm on the case because I've been reading that at great interest.
Thank you. Ben?
Yes. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. Sorry about that. We are in pretty uncharted territory for this meeting. I don't think in the last 20 years or so we've ever had to come back to members within just about the first month of our financial year with a change in the projected income figures for that year of such a significant nature. The main reason for this is on the 2nd of April we received a letter of intent from DEFRA which notified us of a reduction in our revenue elements of our National Park grants in the order of 8.2%, around about £260,000. So that's primarily the reason why I'm coming to you here this morning to present an addendum to our budget, a revision to our budget and medium-term financial plan which mitigates this action. So the report before you, item 8, considers and approves, or seeks to approve the budget and the medium-term financial plan revision for 25-26. We're looking to adopt the revised revenue budget, and we're also looking for you to approve the fees and charges which are in Appendix 6. Now, since we received that letter of intent, we've reviewed the approved budget that we set in March, members approved in March. We've considered the guidance provided by DEFRA, and we have worked with the leadership team to present an alternative viewpoint. So firstly on the revenue side of things, the revised revenue grant reduction, the advised revenue grant reduction of 8.2%, 263,000, has been mitigated through a number of proposed amendments. They're presented to you in the attached report, sections 2 and 3. Opportunity has also been taken to revise the budget that was set out and agreed in March to take account of known updates since that budget was developed. So I'm looking at things like closer aligning of country stewardship income, countryside stewardship income to the activities that meet it. There have also been several proposed revenue budget amendments, changes to our injections into reserves, so reductions and increases in various areas such as ICT hardware, our facilities expenditure, our vehicles expenditure and purchases. We are seeing increased estate rental income, a requirement for additional conservation advice expenditure. So these changes that are proposed also cross over into our programmes and partnership budget, the area where we seek to work over long-term programmes and work with partners. That's been revised significantly also since the March update. We were proposing amendments to include contributions to reserves and some of our fixed-term discretionary programmes. And the approach undertaken here is to really seek to undertake business as usual for the remainder of the year. We've had a business process review that took effect from 1st of April 2024. To revert back to such a situation so soon is kind of upsets the balance in terms of staffing, creates a difficult arena to work within. So what we're trying to do here is to maintain business as much as usual as possible. The capital programme is also an anomaly in terms of our usual process. So as well as having the downward reduction in our revenue grant, we have seen a significant introduction of capital in the letter of intent from DEFRA. This has changed our capital programme radically from that which was presented to you back in March. DEFRA requested us to present a list of capital projects to them shortly after that letter was received. We sent a list to DEFRA amounting to almost £2.5 million worth of capital projects. We had some feedback on DEFRA from these. That list has been refined and presented to you in Appendix 3 of this paper. Now, the capital allocation which we've been advised of so far, bear in mind that we haven't had formal confirmation of either the revenue or capital yet from DEFRA, was for £1.4 million. We have provided a list of projects totaling £1.9 million to you in this paper. Obviously that exceeds the allocation. We have got some significant constraints with this. We are required to spend that capital allocation by the 31st of March 2026. Now, for some of the more significant projects, that presents us quite a challenge, really, because we've got to firstly seek approval from yourselves for those projects. We've then got to gain the necessary consent, where that impacts on perhaps planning, field and control, perhaps any other areas. We've then got to go through a procurement process, a project planning process, procurement process, and project delivery phase. So some of the larger projects on here, that is going to be very tight in the timescale that we have. Normally capital we would seek to do over 2 or 3 years time period. So that's another kind of challenge presented to us in the last couple of months. You'll see from Appendix 3 that the capital projects are presented to you in a set of themes, which DEFRA has asked us to do in terms of addressing key government priorities and key target areas. So nature recovery, the 30 by 30, investor save, income generation, landscape and heritage, and net zero. We do hope that further capital allocations will be announced to us as part of the spending review that's currently happening for 26-27 onwards. We have had no assurance at this stage. So we don't know at this stage whether there will be additional capital next year. So in terms of the revenue and capital, we're just going on the basis of what we know for DEFRA at this stage. Just going to move over into the medium-term financial plan for a moment. So we review this on an annual rolling basis. I've worked through the changes presented to you here in the report in terms of revenue and capital, in terms of the medium-term financial plan. And if you have a look at the table on section 7.2 of the report, you can see the impact of that revenue grant redemption has actually an increasingly significant impact from year 2, 26-27 of the plan. So in March, what I presented to you was a balanced budget for 25-26 on the assumptions made, a balanced budget for 26-27, and then increasing deficits thereafter. Now, with this change in resourcing in the current year, that has actually brought us into an indicated deficit position in 26-27 of around 40k, 45k, and then increasing throughout the remainder of the medium-term financial plan. So this revenue reduction does have a considerable impact on us as an organisation. Especially when you align it to other changes that have happened in this year, such as the NI, on the employees' NI impact was about 2% of our budget, £80,000. So that is a really worrying trend for us. And also so the indications for the 26-27 spending review that's happening currently, or being talked through government currently, that is also going to be critical for us in our kind of ongoing budget management. It is strongly likely that we're going to see a further business review required at the end of this year into next year. The indications are that we aren't going to get an increased grant following this dip this year. We don't know at this stage what it will be. So that business process review may be required to align our resources with our new partnership plan and kind of government priorities that are in force at the time. So it's quite a significant period we are at, and I've used that word several times this morning, haven't I? But we are kind of facing or coming towards a crunch point for our resources. Alongside this report, we've taken the opportunity to produce a set of fees and charges. We've not actually done this for a couple of years. 2022 was the last time a set of fees and charges was brought to you as members. We are working on an income generation strategy currently, and that income generation strategy will be brought to members in the autumn this year, and that will align with the fees and charges that are presented here. And the plan will be then to bring fees and charges to you annually alongside the budget papers in March. So I've mumbled on a bit, I'm afraid, apologies. Essentially the report describes a process that we seek to achieve a balanced budget again in 25-26 following the change in our resource provision. Presents some of the challenges that we will face in the medium term and longer term. We are still awaiting formal confirmation of the 25-26 budget. We're still awaiting formal confirmation of the 26-27 spending review and what impact that might have on national parks in the UK and England. But I can say that the revised budget for 25-26 on a revenue basis remains balanced. It's based on robust and realistic estimates and assumptions, and is presented to you for the easier to approve. And I'll take any questions at that point.
Thank you, Dan. I'm sorry it was so depressing. Tom, you've already got your hand up.
Thanks. Two questions. First, I mean, it's clearly outrageous that national parks are required by law to set a balanced budget, and then after you set a balanced budget on the best estimates, after the year's begun, we get a letter to say
After the 1st of April.
and we still don't know what the actual position is going to be. I mean, is there any prospect or potential in a joint judicial review of the decision-making process amongst national parks, perhaps?
Andrew?
Is there an appetite for it amongst national parks?
I'm just thinking of jointly because of the costs.
Yeah. I mean, clearly it's an unsustainable position that we've all been put in. We can't carry on like this.
Thank you, Chair. I think we also have to take it, however, in the context of the additional capital spend and the ability of some national parks, potentially not all, to use some of that capital to pick up the deficit. However, can I take that one away and discuss with colleagues, because it is an interesting thought, and I don't want to just publicly say yes or no, but let me take that one away and have a look at it.
My second point was clearly the revenue hit, whatever it eventually turns out to be, will have an impact on staff resources, and this ambitious capital programme of the year that needs to be spent. Will all the staff resources spent on the capital works be able to be capitalised?
Good question.
Some will be able to be capitalised, but
Just
not
some.
all. Some, not all. It depends on the programme, whether it's creating an asset. So some of the feasibility works, as an example, may not be fully capitalisable, but elements of that management will be.
Susan?
Thank you. Yeah, kind of just picked up on that point there. So I had a little example I think it was last week. Dominic and I were at a FIPL meeting, so Partnership Grants Grant panel discussion about this year's grant, and this issue came up about revenue and capital and what could be capitalised. And there was a little example of, so if you're doing education work, you don't call it a workshop, you call it an event, or it's the other way around. A visit. You call it a visit, you don't call it a workshop. Okay. Anyway, just baffling to me, that's the way my mind works. So I suppose my question is, so that's just one little example, so my question becomes, in the bigger picture, my concern is about uncertainty about what DEFRA may or may not decide counts or can be capitalised in the future. So how do we plan ahead when we want to deliver something, but we're not sure, well, will that, will we be able to capitalise that? How much of that are we going to have to find ourselves? And then, of course, my other concern then becomes that it means that staff resource becomes attached to projects. So you're looking at, this nasty scenario of looking at having project-based staff who are employed on a contract basis just to deliver projects, rather than having, permanent staff who are employed to deliver a wide span of work. So it's just some thoughts. It just puts its concerns about the way this is going, and how we manage it best, so that we don't get caught out in terms of being able to have sufficient revenue funding for our staff cohort and to deliver all the things that we want to be doing.
So I think that was. Has there been any conversations about what we can capitalise and get away with? I suppose.
There have been many discussions between National Park colleagues, DEFRA and SIPA, about this situation. We've had quite a lot of guidance and training delivered as well. There is actually a difference between how DEFRA treats capital, according to the FREM, in terms of central government, and what we're required to report in our annual accounts, which is provided by the SIPA Code of Practice. So there are slight nuances in that, and we've discussed those as National Park bodies about what we can use, what we can truly capitalise, what we essentially report back to DEFRA that we have spent the money on, to confirm that we have treated it in the same way that they require it as being capital. That may differ from the way we report it in our accounts. So we have worked with colleagues at other national parks. It has been a primary area of concern because of the significant change of it. So yes, that has happened. I'm aware of the FIPL discussions because I understand that there is less FIPL revenue in 25-26 and more capital. And the staffing report, that was very early on in this stage. That was our primary concern, because our staff are our most valuable resource. They are incredibly important to us in seeking out external funding to delivering our core purposes, and they are the only resource we currently have to undertake these projects. So to actually reduce the staff base on that basis is quite alien and quite counter growth for us as an organisation. So it is an immediate concern to us as a leadership team. Yes.
Thank you. Right, we've got Mandy, Dominic, and Laura. So Mandy.
Thank you. It feels like a bit of a watershed moment actually in terms of funding, and it does feel like there is that sort of lurch towards project-based one-off funding, and I think that's something we've probably seen with lots of things in the last couple of years. We are getting more and more, this is the money to do this is how you deliver it, and this is the end of the project, so beginning, middle and end. And I think that challenge is around staff. I think that challenge is around being really clear on absolutely everything you're able to capitalise, and between the parks working that out so we can actually maximise it. But if this is the route that we are going down, I think there will need to be perhaps some changes in approach, looking more at those that are putting in bids, bid writing, all that sort of thing, and then covering those costs within any money you get. And I think it will need a slightly different approach, and I will try and be positive. There might be some more things we can go for. There is always that potential that there might be more pots of money that you're bidding for, but as with all bids for funding, they're nearly always oversubscribed and you get into this position. So I think we will have to make the best of it. It was really difficult for me to follow this through, and I know it's a difficult paper to write. But when you're changing from one thing to another, I was trying to follow it all through in the paper. It's quite difficult to articulate that, I think, through a paper. But I think my fear is this is a changing way of funding things. What we have to make sure is we make the absolute best of it that we can and move with it as well as we can. And I think all parts will be in the same position.
Thank you. I'm going to keep going, if I may. Dominic.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the report. I think when I first read it, I I sort of shut it again and thought, actually, I can't cope with that. I think I'll open it again tomorrow. Maybe it's changed. Maybe I just misunderstood this in some way. Because it was actually quite hard to take in, because you thought, oh, no, that's just ridiculous. That can't be true. And then you realise that it is. And actually, as Susan said, actually we had a kind of preview of it with the FIPL meeting, and this does have a relevant crossover. So FIPL, yeah, of course with FIPL we've never really known each year whether it's going to happen again for another year, which has been really, really irritating. And then, so this year the budget is about 520,000 for grants that we'll be giving out, but a maximum of 70,000 of that is for revenue. Right? Now I won't go into how we, within the FIPL grants, work out what's capital and what's revenue, but it is, yes, basically, if you're doing educational visits, then if you call it a workshop, then that's revenue. If you call it visits, then that's capital. Now that's DEFRA confirmed that. So that's an example, if you like, of us going back and saying, sorry, what? And then, okay, that's how it is, fine, right, whatever. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what we'll work with. But there's another issue that, of course, is that we've already got one pre-approved grant, which is the Sowing the Seeds project, and then we have a potential grant that was sort of there in the sidelines waiting to come through for Ennis. Between the two of them, those two grants, which would be, bear in mind, for Exmoor National Park's own projects, would soak up the entire revenue budget for all FIPL for the whole year, which means we wouldn't be able to give another revenue grant for the rest of the year. Now that clearly is a real problem, and we had a lot of chat about that, about how we deal with that and what we can do with it. But of course it's not so simple as then saying, well, the park needs to step back a bit so that we can ensure that we're actually giving grants out to landowners and farmers rather than actually for our own projects. Well, okay, but some of our projects, of course, are really good for developing other schemes to come forward from landowners and farmers. So you get stuck in this sort of kind of mental diagram in your head about how this is all supposed to work. It's very irritating. But I think what I like in your appendix, it hasn't got a number, but I think it's appendix 3, where you've listed and then coded the proposed capital spends, and then whether they're going to be 30 by 30 and net zero and stuff like that. I think what I found in this, I mean, there might be here somewhere else in another place I haven't quite understood, but I suppose seeing this in another way is which of these are potentially revenue raising. So, for instance, like the repurposing of assets to become boxes is one example in here, 150,000. Well, that sounds good if that's going to be revenue raising and actually long-term revenue. You know, that's revenue that then will be recurring in years to come. And so it's like another colour coding in a way to try and work out or score the revenue raising potential of these particular investments. And again, I'm sure you've done that, I just haven't seen it here yet. But then the other complication, of course, is the estate. Which, of course, do you see the estate as a kind of self-contained entity, which is rather separate from these other things that we're doing, and I can see that as a complexity. But of course, what I do want to say is what I think has been excellent over the last sort of 2 or 3 years is a lot of the decisions that have been made actually, I think, have set us up pretty well for where we are now. I imagine other parks are probably in a bit more of a state. And I think particularly that idea of beginning to move the estate into its own sort of entity and seeing that in a different way and how you would use assets appropriately within the estate actually has turned out to be a really good idea, because that, I think, sets us up. I think if we were scrambling around trying to do that now, it would be a lot more difficult. So I think, although when I first read it, my heart sank, but actually when I thought about the position we're in, I realised that actually maybe, you know, it's alarming, but actually we're in pretty good shape to do certain things. But I say there's just that idea of trying, I know it's difficult to do, but to try and score things according to their revenue raising potential might be useful. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just come back on a couple of those points. I mean, the FIPL, both those projects you named are actually supporting farmers, landowners, in what they're doing on their land. It's invasive species, it's meadow restoration, so that's not specifically on NPA's land, it's actually supporting farmers and landowners to do that. So it's a more balanced view than potentially, are we using all this money in-house? It's not, it's a support officer, it's out in the fields, actually working. Secondly, your point about the opportunities, very much so. I mean, I'm presenting quite a bleak picture in terms of the revenue side of this and how we're going to resource it, the staffing side. going back into 2010 as an example, when we had the comprehensive spending review, 4 years of 25% cuts, we didn't have an and other. We had, you are reducing by this, you'll do this. Here we've got an interesting concept, and we've got actually a substantial capital allocation. We can actually deliver a lot of projects that we want to, that will really assist people living and working in a national park. So it's a fantastic opportunity, just kind of tempered slightly by the risk on our resources. And our estate is, yes, working so much more effectively, and we've got a huge benefit in having that land, that moorland of woodland, that can help us to kind of smooth the long-term income. So, thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Thank you, and apologies I was late, start by saying that. I just want to first recognise the work that's gone into this at speed, like to be able to find and relay nearly £2 million worth of capital projects because of the ask there is absolutely incredible. So I wanted to recognise that first. I agree with Dominic, we do need to prioritise the long-term revenue generating ones, so colour code, whatever, that would be a good way to go. I think the reason the cynic in me says the reason it's moving to project-based is because politicians can then say, we did that, we did that, we did that. And so I think there's a bigger question here for us of how we influence, because, yeah, we're back in National Parks England now, funded by the government, our position there. So I do think there's a advocacy, isn't it? We can advocate question here. You know, how we work with people like Campaign for National Parks, how we work with our local MPs, how other national parks work with their local MPs, get those questions being asked in Parliament, that sort of, you know, get those points being raised, because we need a bigger voice to say, look, this is, you know, this year we can make it work. If we get the next notice on the 2nd of April next year, we're going to be in a really difficult position again, and noting the impact on staff, because as soon as you see budget cuts, you think, oh dear. And what I don't want is our brilliant staff here at Exmoor that worried about whether they've got a job next year or the year after, or there's an annual restructure, because that's not going to keep morale high and get people doing, you know, the best work. I've been there, so yeah, I think that's perhaps one for us to take away and think about how we can have that influence.
I'm going to bring Chief Executive now, so we did have a ministerial visit.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we did. In fact, we've had 2 meetings with the Minister over the last few weeks, one of them in London with all of the other Chief Execs and National Parks England, and the other when the Minister and the new DEFRA lead, Gabrielle Edwards, met with us, and we had an afternoon looking at various projects around the National Park, and the leadership team joined her and were able to make many of the points that you've already made, and that's gone back through very loud and clear that there is a minimum at which these national parks can operate. If what looks and feels like a national park costs a certain amount to run, and we've probably gone below that, certainly in Northumberland and Exmoor and possibly in New Forest. So we've made that really, really clearly. You cannot run an organisation safely with this diminishing revenue. Now we know why they're doing it. It's Treasury rules. They can spend capital. They don't want to spend revenue because capital looks like investment, and that's where we're going. It's invest for growth, invest for growth. So we understand where it's coming from, but it's just trying to make it clear the impact of that on these organisations. Good point was made about our estate, and yes, we are in reasonably good shape, and you won't be surprised to hear that, you know, we've been having these kind of conversations with DEFRA for the last year or two, because officials could see where this was going and what was coming next, and so we are in reasonably good shape, although I am concerned because we've got less than a year to get this money out the door. It's a lot of money with pretty much, you know, no extra staff to do it. And so we're asking the staff to do even more and even more and even more to get the money out the door and spend it well, when we will be up against Barnell, weather, procurement, all of that. So it's a challenge. And I think government is sort of almost testing us. It's a kind of, well, can you do this? You know, step up. If you can do this and you do it well, there might be some more money coming. But all the indications are there is no more revenue, and in fact it could actually just get worse before it gets better. So yeah, a lot of pressure on the staff team over the next 12 months.
Robin,
Thanks, Chair. A few bits in my scribbled notes, so they may not be entirely joined up. But first of all, around the advocacy bit, a really good point I think that was made by you, Laura, that we've got an opportunity with the new version of NPA to, rather than be the us and them approach with DEFRA, it's part of DEFRA. The advocacy can be there directly, and I think there's an opportunity to make that work now. The other bit is, it's still concerning that this is still sort of an indicative direction. We're still in this interim version of this does this year. Now what? We've been asked to approve a partnership plan for 2 years. We have absolutely no idea what funding might be available for the second year of that to help deliver it. Oh, 4 years, I can't remember, 4 years, 5 years. You know, so how do we actually realistically pull together that partnership plan and understand what the focus and direction of this national park will be when it has absolutely no idea what it's funding, or if they're going to change the rules as they have now to specify how you spend any additional money, whether it be revenue or capital or whatever. And if they can specify at that level now, look at the options for next year. However, you've got to treat it as a bit of an opportunity because we've got a heck of a spend capital-wise to actually make very good use of this year. So I think, thank you very much for rewriting all of this again. There's a fair chance you might have to do it yet again, I suspect, as you very well know. And we will look forward to the next iteration. Just one or two bits within it. There'll be the question that will ask the future of one-off funding. Now, you know, I deal quite a bit with DEFRA on varying other bits, and I don't think any part of DEFRA that I work with has any idea what the funding post-spending review is going to be, or what the future of it long-term is going to be. They seem to be sort of wandering from day to day with 1,001 options and no real direction. So that's kind of a feeling. And if the future is one-off funding, is it going to be one-off funding allocated, or is it going to be on a bid basis? Now, I can wind the clock back to 1 or 2 numbers here when we had Rural Development Fund money, and we had people writing bids. We had somebody employed in Exmoor National Park to write bids. That was it. That was his job. He was exceptionally good at it too. We don't have that, and the capacity, although, you know, absolutely brilliant job being done by the staff members here that have written bids so far. But their capacity to keep writing bids endlessly is relatively limited, and then delivering what that bid might achieve. So there's a question there. Question around how we can make sure we leverage this to ensure that what capital spending we put in place has a legacy value that won't cost us revenue in the future, that maybe gives us that opportunity to put work in a direction that we don't have to keep spending to do it. Is that possible? The future of Fipple's come up anyway, and I think that's a toss-a-coin job, quite honestly, at the moment. My own personal feeling would be the person heading DEFRA at the time of dealing with Fipple and setting it up has now moved to be Chief Executive of the South Downs. I think his direct input currently, having just left DEFRA, has been quite helpful for us in this. However, that influence is always relatively short-term like that, isn't it? So, just a heads up there as to what influenced it, and that's where the new NPA approach might have some value. Just looking through the bits, interesting comments been made. Financial markets recently, and you've answered my question after I'd scribbled it down. Change in interest rates. We earn quite a nice little bit of interest at the moment, but there's quite a lot of talk that interest rates are likely to reduce at the moment. That's potentially could overnight relatively double our deficit, or virtually double our deficit, couldn't it? Would that be a correct assumption? And that's kind of the visioning. Part of national parks has been about a long-term visioning, and we've talked about that already this morning with the presentation Dan gave us. A long-term vision of what we can deliver, what's out there, you know, what people want to do in here. But that's a vision for the future. It's not for just what you do this year and walk away. So it's how that we develop those, because what we've got in front of us is very short-term visionary stuff. Some of it even retrospective. I said, you asked me to deliver a balanced budget, and then to turn around and say, actually, but we've changed what we're going to give you anyway, after you've written the balanced budget. And then the other bit around the FIPL and those works that we're doing, and that's probably links direct to the countryside stewardship, a lot of the work on our own estate and the opportunities there. There is, of course, at the moment in the back of my mind, a feeling that FIPL is compensated for the fact they've withdrawn SFI at the moment. There's announcements due on that, and I know I've got meetings next week on the new SFI and what it looks like. That could potentially impact future FIPL. People might be shoveled in a different direction, which would be a pity because there's been a lot of opportunity within FIPL. Yeah, a lot of debate, but quite a lot of opportunity. And then finally, I'd just like to move the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Starting there, sorry, Andrew's next, then you, Stephen.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. I know you've been thanked already for the work, but obviously professionally what you're having to do is so different to where you've been trained to look at this and go to project-based thinking. And I think you've done very well. I hear on one hand we've got to lobby maybe to get it changed, but I think as you are accepting this is the way it is and play by the rules as best possible and understand those definitely rules as best possible. Looking at this, 800,000 is against driver. If we have projects which we get paid for, but if they only get paid at the end, do we have to start restructuring our projects? Because if we've got 500,000 against redoing the house, if we don't finish it, we lose 500,000. Can we start slicing these things up, have milestone payments or separate projects, and just change the way we plan things, have good project plans, submit them, because if you have to wait 500,000, that's a massive risk, isn't it? But slice it up and separate projects. So I understand those rules, I guess, are going to be really important. I also wonder if there's any way we can learn from anyone else who's been through this. I was in construction, we work project-based working. We used to tender on that basis. We'd front-load tenders and purposely. So then if we did it up front, we got overpaid for. The last thing we did, we got underpaid for, and that's the way we tendered. So that if you didn't get paid for the last bit, you didn't mind. So I just wondered, well, it's true, you didn't. And you tendered that way. So like site offices, we got paid up front. So we changed the way we price things, the way we structure projects because of the funding. So I think, coming back, Rob's going to have to look hard, to work hard, I think, and how we structure the projects to make sure we finish. Or can we get milestone payments during the year? That was sort of one question there. And the final thing, when we come on to the fees and the income, very good. And when we get more information on it, will we get an indication of whether we're trying to make money on those fees or we're just trying to cover our costs? But obviously that's, you said we're going to get represented because some of it's pricing on what the market can take, I guess, and some of it's pricing on where we feel we're subsidising, and some of we're trying to cover our costs. The idea of the pricing thinking behind that would be useful.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Very good point, sir. I mean, the last one, yes, the income generation strategy defines why we are seeking fees and charges, areas we have statutory fees, what the concept's for, where we're subsidising. So it includes all that detail and almost like a decision-making matrix side of things.
Okay.
Your first point is absolutely vital, yes. That project and program management really is utterly key on this one, and how we slice and dice that down to each individual projects. We've got, I think, the benefit of the capital injection from DEFRA is going to be potentially on a quarterly basis, income received. So it will help our cash flow, and potentially, depending on how it comes in, with the interest rate high, it may produce some sort of comfort benefit from that, having some of those sums invested if we're not using them directly straight away. Just coming back to a point Robin made, yes, if the interest rates were to fall out of the market tomorrow, we've got about £120,000 income projection for interest. So you're looking at almost the equivalent of 2 posts that are funded by interest and income alone. But I think looking at the market trends, I personally don't feel that's a likelihood in this current year, let alone mid next year. But in the current scenario, do we really know what's happening in terms of the macro politics? So yes, Andrew, sorry. That programme management is utterly key on this side of things, and we should be able to smooth our funding of that with the DEFRA grant coming in quarterly.
So that it's going to be quarterly potentially. So if you have a project over 12 months, you can get paid for that with the right milestones.
So it's I mean that money alone is on that basis. So we submitted normally at the start of the year. We're a bit delayed now, as we were actually similar last year. We submit a claim in for the main national park grant and any additional bits and pieces. And that's normally on a 25% profile for the quarter. So that's slightly different to the other projects we may look at, where actually we won't get paid until in arrears. But that is very much a part of each of these projects. We will have to prepare a project plan for, look at the cash flows, look at the dynamics of who's going to support this. And it may be that we need some external support in to help us to manage this whole group, and that's not completely out the window.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just picking up what Ben said there, and also reflecting what Laura said earlier, what is the macro picture here? Because actually understanding what's going on in the bigger sphere can help us perhaps tackle the long-term implications of this. Obviously, it has been fairly clearly understood that Pat McFadden and the Cabinet Office have got this directive out now that all government, all quangos are going to be looked at very severely to see what powers can effectively be repatriated to Whitehall. I know you will shout unanimously such cynicism in one so young, but I just wonder if in fact this isn't part of that, and moving from a revenue stream to a capital one isn't basically, as Laura rightly said, a means really of ministers being able to say, well, you know, these are projects for which I can take direct credit, and it gives government perhaps more direct control over what national parks are doing. It is a big, complicated picture, but if we are part of that, to some degree it makes it easier to argue the exceptionalism of national parks. They need to be treated differently. If this is just something that's directed at national parks alone, and serious thought has been given to this is the way that we want to deal with national parks, it's more difficult to argue against. If it's something that's pretty widespread, I think it makes it easier for us to make a case, yes, but you need to really single national parks out for slightly different treatment. But this is stuff that's only really going to unwind over the course of the next few months. So that's why I think we need to be in very close dialogue with the other national parks and other organisations in this sphere, just to see what the real picture is. It's still very early days with this, but I think that it is part of something much bigger, and we need to know how to tackle it best to get the best result for us. So we need to be very attentive to what the messages really are.
That's actually very much my thoughts, that we need to be very much at the top of the game here. We need to try and find out what we can about the background to how we've got to where we are. But we are singled out, not but national parks are not organised as a family compared to other agencies that might be out there. There's some work to be done. Fortunately, I've got plenty of time now. So, would you like to second it, please? Sorry to put it in almost, but we've got somebody to propose it, and I do need to keep an eye on the clock today. So, I've got no more hands raised, and so I presume there's no more questions. Also, Marcus, did you have a question?
Well, actually, it's a question, actually, and again, I mean, funny enough, I wrote at the top here, it's all about control, and I thought I wasn't brave enough, maybe it is, and then it's all just been repeated. So, I do generally worry about the control aspect of it, and but also when I think Chief Executive said we're getting, what was it he said? It's the minimum we're down to. At what point do we get to the point where they want us to deliver national park purposes, but we physically can't? And how? And it's a question I got asked at parish council meeting the other day. I do actually go to the other one. And it was, is there any hope? And if and the question I suppose there is looking at the long term, the 5-year deficit. I mean, where is the hope, and how do we, as a group of national parks, send that message home? Because you look at it and it's like there's people been around longer than me, and it's like all we ever seem to be doing is cutting budgets. And where does it stop if we want to run a national park like a national park should be run? I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly, what the next few weeks is going to be about is finding out where we get to the stage where there's nothing more we can do, and that's it. That's the end of the organisation. Is that the grand plan? I don't know. But there is certainly some work to be done within the national park. Very briefly, please, Bill. Sorry to be so
It's going to be very brief, Chairman. What happens if you're at a project, the money's not spent by the end of the year? Presumably, you still keep the money that you've spent already. That money is still coming from Jeffrey. How big a risk is it that we're going to get projects with lots of underspend in the year, and we're going to have to then spend that money the following year unfunded? Or from the fund of the following year, so we're going to lose it in the first year, and then we're going to have to find it for the second year.
There is definitely a risk in that.
Yeah.
Definitely a risk in that. We've got a reasonable level of earmarked reserves, and as we go through the year, the budget management, the capital programme, especially management, will have to be quite precise so that we can review that and make us aware as a leadership team, make you aware members of what scale that risk will be year end. Definitely a risk. We've got reasonable resources to be able to deal with it if it is back into our own hands, but I'd rather we did actually spend it and make full use of the DEFRA funding and potentially match further sources of funding with external world as well.
Just one other thing I just thought of. Any capital items, will the depreciation on those kind of go into revenue for the next whatever years? No.
Okay, so there's 4 recommendations, but I'm going to add a 5th, which I hope you've both taken, but we thank the staff because this is unprecedented and that we've had to do this. Thank you. You have the right, all those in favour? Thank you very much. It's unanimous. Okay, moving on. Item 9, governance review. Executive.
Thanks, Chairman. So we turn to the wiring. So this brings together some discussions that we've been having over the last 2 years now about size of board, around planning, about number of meetings that we have, the nature of the meetings, and the future of what we used to call the Parish and District or Parish Consultative Forums, which then became the Exmoor National Park Forum. If I take the planning committee element first, so back in April 23, I think we agreed to consult with the wider community on some proposals that we had to create a smaller planning committee and reduce authority meetings. We ran that survey, you'll remember, and the response was that people generally thought a smaller planning committee was sensible. So we agreed then to trial it, and we've run that trial now for nearly 12 months. Ultimately, this is your decision. I'm setting it against sort of general government advice that smaller planning committees and smaller committees generally work better, and that comes from sort of local government association, planning advisory service, and of course the landscapes review, which recommended that sort of 9 to 12 kind of size of committees. I've also discussed with your officers, the planning team, and they feel the last year has worked very well indeed, that the meetings have generally been efficient and well run, and members very well engaged with those meetings. So I'm recommending that you continue with 12, set up as it is with the allocation that's set out in 3.2 for 1133. Okay. On the number and timing of authority meetings, we thought we would trial, in the light of COVID, the idea of half the meetings being online and being sort of briefings and discussions, and the alternate ones would be formal meetings of the authority. In practice, as officers, we don't feel it worked terribly well. We ended up having all the meetings face to face anyway. We were sort of squashing some of the items into one meeting and having rather too much to deal with when we had to do budget and that. So I'm proposing that we go back to having monthly meetings, but probably 10 a year, so that we skip the August and the January one. And finally, the Consultative and Parish Forum. So over the many years, we've tried sort of different formats, and we had up until 24 5 meetings a year. We did have falling attendance, struggling a little bit with agendas on some of those meetings. So we tried working with the 5 parish members to change the format a bit, really. Get it down to 2 meetings, and the staff team put a huge amount of effort into those 2 meetings. So we had sort of big agendas, tried one in the evening, one in the daytime. We had a better turnout, and I think they were quite good meetings, actually, in hindsight, but very, very expensive to run. A lot of officer time, chair allowance and so on. It did mean that they were very expensive meetings. So given the amount of engagement that happens through all of that great long list you can see in 6.1, and that's probably not all of it. We discussed it, I think it was last month, wasn't it, at our member forum. I think the feeling is there needs to be something, but we probably can't resource to the level that we used to. But we'd like to try running one big meeting a year at which we really focus on the partnership plan, and we talk to the communities, and we invite all the parish councils, really encourage them to come about the work that's been going on over the year. Doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities for people to engage, phone, email, any other means. But that is our suggestion to you, which we think is doable and affordable, and hopefully will reach as many people as possible.
And there's a typo. So there's a typo of 5.8. Yeah, sorry, 5.8. If you just check that, it used to be changed to the meeting should be chaired by the authority chairman or the deputy chairman.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I meant to mention that. Yeah.
Right. John. I'd like to look something really well. Like a little shiny beacon.
I mean, I see this as almost a continuation of the previous report about the dire financial revenue situation we find ourselves in, with very few officers scurrying around trying to keep 6 balls in the air each. And I think our responsibility as members is that when we take decisions like this, and I'm sure it's the first of many, we try and take as much unnecessary load off officers as possible by reducing anything that can be reduced, because as we've talked about, we're in dire financial situations here, so we can't have officers spending lots of time arranging a parish forum that just doesn't work for some reason. But as long as we make sure that we get the engagement. Now, I'm one of the members of the planning committee, it happened, and I certainly agree with the officer's recommendation that it's worked better, I think, than previously when all of us were on it. So on that basis, I'm quite happy to move all 3 recommendations.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was tempted to move all 3, but also give people the opportunity to comment. Just in terms of planning committee, I wasn't aware that there was a great deal of dissent from the system that we have recently introduced. So from my perspective as the Deputy Chair, I'm quite happy to support the recommendation, because I wasn't aware, either from officers or members, that there was a lack of engagement or people were feeling disenfranchised from the decision-making process. So I see no reason to change that at all. And I would certainly support the recommendations in respect to the other 2 issues.
Sorry, can we say, are you secretary?
I am secretary.
Thank you. Dominic, did I see your hand?
Yes, you did.
Is it because you were both days?
No, exactly. No, I'm just I would have proposed and seconded it if it hadn't already been done. So yeah, planning committee definitely, endorse that again. It is working considerably better, smoother, more engaged. It's a big improvement. I can't see any. I can't think of any reason to go back on that. And the parish forum, yes, I agree. I think that argument is well made, well put in this paper, and I follow the reasoning. I was almost tempted to say, again, because when we talked about the cost of it, and in light of the previous discussion, I was almost going to say, well, actually, why have one at all? I mean, if we're not actually legally obliged to have it, and it costs money, and there are so many other ways of communicating with people at the moment, do we really need it? But I can see why that might be a bit too brutal. So having, you know, one, I can see the reason for doing it. But I would always keep it in reserve, as to say, well, yeah, but if interest rates drop, if we have to find money somewhere, then really that meeting I would see as a luxury. But that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it'd be good to be able to report back to our partners about the partnership plan, and I think it's important that we do engage with the parish councils as much as possible. But you're right, we've got to the stage now that you might have to go. All sorts of things might have to go. That's absolutely true. So, Andrew.
Thank you much. First, the planning committee of 12. I think 12 is working very well. But of course, it does raise the question about parish members' support or input. I think a lot of people become parish members because they want to be involved in the planning. So going forward, I think we need to work out how we select the right people for that. I know we voted around the table last time. Is that the right thing? I think it could cause less interest in people becoming parish members. But I think overall, on balance, I support the 12 members. But I think keep that in the back of our head. And on top of that, proposal 3, in reducing the number of national park forums back to 1, I think is unfortunate. I think engaging with the parishes is really important. We struggled to get enough people to stand for parish representatives last time round. So we're taking the ability to be on the planning committee away for some members, and less engagement with the parish. I think it's sending quite a negative signal out there. And I think part of any public body is engagement with parishes. I've gone through the list, and I know Sarah's got a good list here, and Sarah, you've done a lot of work obviously over the last 12 months. Of course, the costings are slightly, or no, not slightly, they're very skewed by the fact that we've got the chair allowance in here. If you took the chair allowance out, the costings of those meetings would change drastically. So you've done that, you've taken the chair allowance out. But if you had 2 meetings, what we did, we had the chair allowance for 4 or 5 meetings, and then we suddenly divided by 2 meetings. So of course those meetings did look more expensive. And we perhaps didn't address that. So I think the cost is unfair the way it's stated, and I think engagement with the parish is so important. If I go back to my father's days involved, there was greater engagement. Now why that is, I don't know, it's another thing. I've not been involved on the committee long enough, but engagement with the parish I think is vital. A lot of the lists you go down through in the engagement can be seen to be narrow interest groups, and we need to keep it broad. I mean, the LCN meetings, which we have, which Stephen does a great job running, they're well attended. They're well attended, and I think people feel they get something from them as well, and they get asked things. And I think that's the thing. Parish members don't, need to be able to contribute. So yes, I can support 1, but not the reduction in parish forum meetings. I find that hard.
So in response to when your lovely father was here,
yes,
we had £4 million. We had a lot more money. That's just that. There's nothing else I need to say really. I'll just leave that floating there. That there was a lot more money around.
And there was a lot more engagement.
We can't change that. We are where we are, and we can't suddenly drum up loads of money. And I think the other thing I just want to say, I'm sorry, I might be taking words out of Sarah's mouth, but the other thing I want to say is not just about money, it's about the capacity we have of our officers to do this. And I understand that. I understand how difficult it is and how much time it takes up. We've already had the conversation about how on earth are we going to run this organisation. I'm afraid the staff we have are going to be very much focused now on how do we spend that capital and how do we change it, if you like, or capitalise. I'm not sure that's ever a word. I'm never sure that's a word. But capitalise what we have. And that's going to have to be our focus. It is just a fact of life, Andrew, I'm afraid. But we haven't got the resources to do all the lovely things that we used to do in the past. In Devon, we don't have LCNs at the moment. We might do because of well, we might do that, but we don't have them. I am not picking up from my parish councils that they feel that they're not being communicated with. And I've got a lot of them, I can assure you. Not one of them has ever said, I don't know what's going on in the national park because you don't tell me. I do tell them. And so they don't, nobody's ever said that. John, you're here, have you ever picked that up?
No.
Jeremy, have you picked that up?
No.
I rest my case. Laura?
Thank you.
Oh, I've got Fran.
I just also wanted to make the point that people engage in very different ways now because, you know, face-to-face is important, but we've got an excellent magazine, we've got excellent digital channels, we've got parish reps on this board who are at the heart of what's going on, who can take that back to the parishes. And I don't think it's a case of either we have a big sort of tea, coffee and cake event, or we're not speaking to the parishes, or we're not speaking to everyone. I think there are other ways, as demonstrated by that list, by the shows we have a presence at, by all that other stuff. And the key for me is we're speaking to a much wider group of people in general, as well as the parishes. I'm not a parish councillor, I can't speak from personal experience there, but just the way, I am a comms expert, so the way we communicate with people has changed, and Caro and the team do a really good job of that as well. So I think perhaps it's on the parish members here to go and encourage people, if they're not already engaging in those spaces, to engage a bit more in those spaces would be really helpful.
Thank you. Fran, sorry, I had you on my list and then I jumped to Laura.
It doesn't matter. I'm pleased to see that we're going to have the 10 meetings, I think, will actually be reinstated, although I do think we could have a couple of those hybrid. I don't think we necessarily have to be here. I mean, I don't know, us being all together today is any benefit or less of a benefit.
But
really,
we have to do that because it's an authority meeting,
right.
So it has to be in person.
Okay, for that point. The other thing I wanted to raise was about the planning committee. I think the planning committee is working okay with 12. I can't really see it's much different than as it was before. However, I do feel that we could maybe increase the amount of people if they really wanted to be part of planning. As you say, with the mention with the parish councillors, they are a lot closer to what is going on in their area. So I think everyone should have the opportunity to be a member of the planning committee should they wish. But I know there are probably several people here who really do not like planning, do not want to be on planning, so would probably vote against that. But that is more for a personal issue rather than for the benefit of the people who we're representing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that John might be about to say about proportions out there. Will you, John? There's some brief on it.
I'm just going to talk about, a couple of people have raised the point about parish councillors and the need to be more engaged in the planning process. But we're all here equally as local, as national, as park authority members. And irrespective of the way that we were appointed, we are here for the same reason. As it happens, I'm not a parish council member. I happen to sit on a parish council, and I'm sure other people do too. But it doesn't mean that my voice is any more or less important than anybody else's.
I thought you were going to say, sorry, shouldn't be thinking about what you might say. So, but we can't just have more parish council members because then that alters the proportions on the planning committee. So I'm afraid that's the way it is. I'm just going to...
Sorry, I wasn't promoting... I'm just saying everybody has the opportunity.
Yeah.
But if they don't want to, then just don't be on it.
Yeah. So, I'll go back to my list. Robin, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of bits within the planning bit. Just to remind members, don't forget any member can attend the planning meeting. You're not barred from the planning meeting if you're not on the planning committee. You can attend and you would be able to speak, so much registered to speak this year. So that gives you that opportunity to represent, if you feel representation is appropriate there, or your thoughts or comments would be appropriate within the context of what's coming up. I mean, quite honestly, there's one this afternoon that may be quite appropriate for most people, if they could, to stay here and attend the planning committee. If nothing else, to provide support for the planning committee in what is quite a contentious application. That is always the case. The bit that I would suggest that we alongside is to expedite the substitution bit, just to ensure that we don't end up with a shortage of people on any one day on planning committee, because that of course is the danger with a relatively small small planning committee. Just let's make sure that change in standing orders is done quite quickly, and not hang around. Regarding the parish representation and so on, I mean, personally, I'm not a parish member. I am a parish council member, but I'm not a parish appointed member now. I don't have any problem with parishes and people contacting me from all over the park, because sometimes I wish they didn't. Because it's not with good news generally, it's normally with a bad complaint. But it gives you the opportunity to feed back, and I think that's what's incumbent on members. That should be part of your role. Make sure you know what's going on, where you get the opportunity. Make sure you engage and talk to people. And yes, it may be uncomfortable at some times, because you're part of an authority that they don't always believe is doing what they want you to do. But it gives the opportunity to explain and give the feedback. So I think it's incumbent on members to take some of that responsibility, rather than behind a committee. And then just to remind members that on number 6 within that paper was the other ways in which the authority engages, and there's quite a considerable list. And within that list, those members that are appointed through the annual meeting, so those varying groups, and have opportunity to attend them otherwise, make sure you attend. Make sure you take the opportunity within those groups to listen to people and to provide the feedback to the authority. And then we can all benefit at, hopefully, the lowest cost possible.
Thank you all. Margaret.
Thank you. Robert just touched on that actually with the the sub situation. I always feel, even the same at Somerset Council, you have to give X amount of notice, and there's times I've sent my folders to a meeting while I've been halfway there, and there's been times, I think there was one where we had a planning meeting the other week and actually I had nothing on that day, the weather wasn't great. I thought, if there's suddenly a desperate need for a sub, I would have subbed. And everybody knows my view of sitting on the planning committee. So I think that, if we can speed that up, and that gives everybody an opportunity, if they do feel left out, to be on it. But I think, as you said, we sit here as members of the National Park, not as members of our authority. So we don't represent anybody apart from the National Park.
Thank you. Stephen, Chairman of the Planning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I suppose I'm in the happy or otherwise position of having chaired all of the bodies that are under discussion this morning at one moment or another. Just thinking about the parish forum. We always used to have 2 meetings a year, the parish and consultative forum. That was historically what we did. The park, let us not forget, hit a very rocky patch in its relationship with the local population about 12, 15 years ago. And it was at that point that we upped the number of parish forum meetings in order to try to manage our way through that situation. Perhaps it is some mark of success of the way that happened, that we've got to the point now where perhaps we feel we need fewer parish forums. I share Mr. Bray's anxieties about reducing the numbers, but I think, let's face it, we've been talking now for 2 years more about reducing the forum, and so the direction of travel has become established. However, I am also mindful that 2 years ago when we started this process, the onset of the LCNs on the Somerset side were part of the reason why we thought we might be able to reduce the number of our forums, because with some struggle, we did actually manage to get the National Park recognised as one of the official members of the Exmoor LCN. And that therefore means that every other month somebody has to turn up for 2 hours, and it can be online, to represent the National Park point of view. So in terms of the expenditure that involves, and to be honest, really time commitment, it's not that huge, but nevertheless it's important because it gives the opportunity for the collective discussion to take place. I know what we're saying about talking to parishes individually, and parishes individually pick up information, but sometimes you do need to have a discussion in the round for people both to express widely held concerns, but also perhaps to have concerns addressed and dealt with. So that's why it is important, I think, for the park to be present at those sorts of collective discussions if possible. But we are in the happy position now, at least for a substantial chunk of this authority area, and it may well be, as we were saying earlier, that Devon will go down that road as well soon, that for relatively minimal involvement, and certainly expense on the park's part, it can engage in the way with those parishes without having to set the meetings up itself. So I think, just need to put that there. While we're here, if I may, without extending it, Madam Chairman, I would like to pay tribute to Mr. Ellicott, because Mr. Ellicott had to take forward the parish forum at a time when perhaps some of the heat was going out of a number of the issues, but to keep engagement with it alive. And Mike did a magnificent job of doing that, and I think we need to be grateful to Mike collectively for the work that he did there. So I do hope that that could be put on record, please.
I think we could put that into the recommendations if you'd like.
I would like, well, I'll add that to the recommendations then, if we may, because I think it's important to note that. When it comes to the planning committee, I will be honest, I have to say that sitting where I do, I don't really see a huge amount of difference whether it's everybody or half of the committee. I see engagement, I see interest, good discussion, good debate. Okay, if you've got more people there, the discussion can run on longer, but I've never noticed really that the quality of the discussion is really higher or lower, whether you've got the bigger number or the smaller number, because you're all good people to start with. So what you say is valuable, whether it's 20 of you saying it or 10. I do think, however, that one of the dangers with having the smaller committee, and we're almost in danger of it this afternoon, because if we're 3 members down, we're missing 25% of our membership. If you've got a big and important issue coming up, as we have, it's not that members aren't quorate, it's not that members won't be making very valuable and valid points, and I'm sure we'll reach exactly the right conclusion, whatever it might be. However, the perception is that it's rather thin, or potentially rather thin, and that is why, if we are going to stick with the smaller committee size, I think it is very important that the standing orders are altered in the way that we've already discussed when it comes to the annual meeting in June, so next month, so that we only require 24 hours notice for substitution rather than 10 days, and that it is reiterated to everybody that you don't have, as long as we've got one person from each of the group sitting, the substitute doesn't have to be from your interest group. So I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I, Mr. Yendall? So we just need to make sure that we've got one parish member, one national Secretary of State appointed member, one local government member. As long as we've got that, the substitute can be from any strand. So members just really, I think, need to take that on board and make sure that we do get the substitutes in, because I think that from the point of public perception, if nothing else, it is important that we keep the numbers up so that we are not seen to be too thin, disregarding what's being said, and that somehow the result of what we say is called into question because not enough members were there, or it's felt that not enough members were there. So, I mean, with some reluctance, I have to say I'll acquiesce in the proposals that are being made. But I do have some concerns about some of it, and I would again say that all of these things have had their role in the past. They may well have their role again in the future. Just because we've decided not to do it for the time being doesn't necessarily mean to say that we're going to park them forevermore.
So you and I have been here quite a long time. You've been here longer than me. You started when you were 12, but...
and you were still in primary school, maybe?
I was. But what I will say is, yes, things do change, and I think priorities change, and we may well go back to more meetings, I just don't know. I just want to make the point that those people who are on the planning committee You know, if you know you're going to be on holiday, then please tell the other people in your group. Don't just leave it. You know, you've got to say. I think there's a responsibility there as members. You're on the planning committee. You know you're not going to be here. For goodness sake, tell the rest of us that. You know, I'm not repeating you because you're here anyway. But you know, it's only Jeremy and I that could possibly do it at the moment from Devon County Council. And it's just like just say, because there is something about why have these people not got somebody if they knew they were going to be incapacitated away or whatever. So there's just something about that. Chief Executive, is there anything you wanted to come back on? Thank you. So, sorry, I've got two more. Jeremy and then Bill.
One small point. Support everything that's been said. But let's make sure we train enough people so we have a pool we can draw from.
I think we're all trained.
For the planning committee. If everyone's trained, then that's fine.
We are all
Thank you.
Bill.
If I support everything that Stephen just said, in particular, talking about the forums, I think it's really important. It's a really important point of communication with the people out there on the park who are likely to be slightly disgruntled and want to come and challenge the park. So having that opportunity to everybody to come is so important. If you don't have it, then that's a safety valve which you shut off and may cause problems in the future. And as I also support the planning committee when it looks thin. This afternoon is a big meeting. If there are members that can stay and join us, I think it'd be really good because I think it's going to, you have a huge number of public here and just 3 members of the planning committee, it just doesn't look really like it's saying. I'm not saying that the judge, we won't do the right thing, but I do think it's important that we're seen to be, having here in attendance. So.
Yeah. I think what Mr. Gee's saying is it'd be nice if some people could stay behind later on speed. They will be sat in the public gallery. They will not be members of the planning committee.
Yes, we won't have
Yeah. I understand that. Right. Anybody else? John, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Very quick thing. I just want to say, we're talking about 12 members on our planning committee, and we have, compared to many other planning authorities, quite very few applications overall. As an example, Torridge District Council gets far more applications than us, and it's got 9 on its planning committee. It's planners committee they call it.
Thank you. Right, no more hands, so can I see all those in favour, please? Thank you. And those against? It's 1 card. Any abstentions? Oh, and 1 abstention. Thank you very much. It's clearly carried. So moving on now to item 10 and overall.
Thank you, Chairman. The last paper I brought to you was in December, and that was by means of an update for in 2024. And at the end of that meeting, I undertook to bring the paper to you in May, which is what we're doing. And the paper that you have had a chance to look at sets out the development phase, and I'll come to why we're calling it a development phase a bit later, for the next 4 years, to the end of 2028. Not quite 4 years. So what I'd like to do is just go through the paper, but by means of a presentation, and just draw your attention to the sort of salient points. If you're happy with that. So development phase for driver, and a recommendation which is to approve that development phase, and I will go through it now. Just to cast your mind back, we've had quite a lot to and fro with you over driver over the last few years. It is a massive project for us and for the organisation, and we've had a lot of context this morning in terms of our funding situation and the need to address the deficit in revenue in the future. And I hope you'll see how driver plays a part in that. The asset came back in 2023. And it was not expected. We had a bit of forewarning of it, but it wasn't expected. And there was a process of securing the assets and bringing it back in hand. And alongside that, the designing of the feasibility phase there, countryside stewardship design, and your own decision on retaining the asset. And remember, there was a difficult financial time then, and there was, there was concern about whether it should be retained or disposed of. Last year was very much about scoping and options, and we brought a workshop to you in the middle of the year to look at that. We also secured CS Countryside Stewardship funding. We also did the development phase for Pioneers and secured funding for that, and the Landscape Recovery Scheme was being set up at that point. So what we've got to, the stage we've got to now is for what we would like to call a development phase. And that is to really test how the driver operates as an entity over the next 3.5 years. So really what we're asking for is your approval to, in effect, road test the operating model and how it will work. And as a result of that, we will have, a good sense of it. It is a complex project. I'd say it's not a project, it's effectively a program driver. Why are we doing it now? Well, the idea is to coincide with Landscape Recovery Scheme delivery. So we're in the development phase of Landscape Recovery, but by the middle of 2026 we'll be in the delivery phase. Pioneers, a lottery-funded project, is just begun, and that is in its delivery phase at the moment. So really, the development phase for Driver is a sort of road testing operation to see how it aligns and can work with those other key aspects, so landscape recovery and Pioneers. And then from 2029 onwards, we're into, in a sense, the ongoing business as normal at Driver, but it will be informed directly by the development phase. I think just to make it very simple, at the heart of it, to put it in the words of some colleagues, we want to retain Driver to enable us to do what we are good at. So we as an organisation, despite our funding predicament and everything else, there are certain skills and expertise that we bring to Driver. And we're very keen not to be back where we were a few years ago, where we had a tendency at Driver where the National Park was very hands-off. And in fact, Claire shared a document with me this morning, which is a management plan from 2003, saying our aspirations for Driver, but quite hard to make those aspirations happen. So even a very long time ago, we were sort of hands-off and always had been. So we want a relationship there, and we want a role there that is aspirational, I think, based on our own expertise. But fundamentally, we also want to give opportunities to others where their skills are stronger than ours. So we don't recognise that we have expertise in everything, thank goodness. And in those situations, to basically forge very strong partnerships. So we see it as a partnership operation there. And alongside that diagram, you can see at the top what we bring to it, and at the bottom what our partner and partners bring to it. We shared this with you in August 2024, but I think our own thinking has developed since then as well. Just remind ourselves of how significant the asset is. We talked a lot about our estate, and of course the bulk of the estate is focused on the former Royal Forest, of which Driver is a huge and significant asset. We were talking yesterday on leave about a place that had a 1,000-acre park, and what an enormous asset that was for the National Trust. And we're talking about 800 acres here, a significant piece of land and a significant responsibility for us. In fact, this view is taken from the drive of Pinkery, and very often people go to Pinkery and think of that as Pinkery, but of course you're on land that is operated from Driver. So I'd like to go through very briefly the strategic context, if you like, the strategic and slightly the funding context as well, but strategy first. The estate strategy that, the 20-year estate strategy that you approved a couple of years ago now, is worth going back to and reminding ourselves of, and I'm not going to read it out to you, you can read that for yourselves, but we see Driver as fundamental to the strategy, effectively, the delivery of that strategy, and it aligns terribly well with that. I hope you'll indulge me in this one. The partnership plan comes to you in July, and obviously you've seen it in its early iterations, and you've seen the draft. But the partnership plan, in a sense, is a response to what the government want protected landscapes to be doing. And if you just look at the list there of our plot-off priorities, if you like, and our partnership plan priorities, therefore, you'll see 7 really key areas which Driver delivers on. So the idea that somehow this is something aside from what we should be doing would be extraordinary. And I think it is worth looking at those. It's priority habitat, triple SIs in favourable condition, and it goes on and on. Nature-friendly farming, peatland restoration, increased tree canopy, and of course access and engagement. And Driver will deliver on all of those. Our funding context, I almost didn't put this slide in actually. I just thought it was too painful this morning. But you've approved core funding for Driver, and obviously we've also approved a land disposal, which was ANSTI, and the receipt from that land disposal enabled us to progress as we have with Driver. And those funds were specifically allocated mainly for the house refurbishment, which will happen in 2025. We are behind schedule on the house procurement, mainly due to the scale of it, complexity of it, and the complexity in particular of the renewable energy system that's required there. But we hope to begin procurement of that next month. We've benefited from FIPL grants, the National Historic Buildings Renovation Grant. We've got potentially additional DEFRA capital in terms of the paper that Ben brought to you previously. We have countryside stewardship in place there, which will run into 2028 if necessary, but our aspiration is that it is replaced by landscape recovery scheme next year. And that's pretty critical if we go back to the conversation we had earlier about revenue in support of these things, because we would be expecting the landscape recovery scheme to be at least as good as countryside stewardship, which currently brings in 130,000 a year revenue, and hopefully better than that. But we also, as part of the development phase, see ourselves attracting additional funding. So we see this as in a sense, a multiplier effect. So the investment we've made at Driver, in a sense, will prove the pudding. Very briefly, the East Barn, which was funded by FIPL, was completed towards the end of March 2025, just within the project timeline, and that's enabled us to take a huge step forward there. The next thing, as I mentioned, is the house refurbishment. We're also looking at, we've commissioned a feasibility and completed a feasibility study on the traditional farm buildings. I mentioned that in December, and that is relevant now because what we would like to do in 2025 is progress the feasibility on the West Barn range, which is the sort of upper one, just to the left of the house in the upper image there. And part of Driver will always be about traditional skills, heritage skills, whatever you'd like to call them. So the development phase in headlines, if you like, from now until the end of 2020 to 2028 is through Pioneers delivering 7 nature recovery projects, through Pioneers delivering, and these are all things we're currently doing, obviously, through Pioneers delivering engagement, learning skills, and a range of activities there, including young rangers, welcome to Exmoor Days, school visits, etc., and the role of volunteers there as well. We'll also improve physical access, in particular, better access from the roadside to Driver and better access between Pinkery and Driver itself. The CS scheme will continue to be delivered and replaced by landscape recovery. Sober Seeds will continue at Driver and in so doing will deliver the countryside stewardship options and also then landscape recovery. We'll also progress site infrastructure, in particular the West Barn, and we will also, and this is the crucial bit which we haven't shared with you up until now, first of a series of gateway tenancies, as we're calling them, which will be operated on the farm business tenancy model. Short-term tenancies, these will be 5 to 7 years, and are meant to be a process by which applicants can generate the skills in terms of moving them perhaps from away from more traditional farming to farming with nature, regenerative farming, or nature recovery projects working alongside us. This is not something we have done previously, and it's something that we will aim to secure in terms of the first tenancy in 2026, when we are very clear of what landscape recovery will bring us. We're already creating wood pasture at Driver and delivering a range of other projects on the ground. So don't see this as something for the future. This is something that's already going on. This photograph was taken about 3 weeks ago. And yes, we are watering the trees. I don't know how long to spend on this. As part of the development phase, we envisage potential revenue streams, and I would be the first to say that the proof will be in that development phase to see what the return actually is. Let's not talk about forecasting things and rely on those. Let's say the development phase will actually give us the figures that we're to prove whether this works or not. So the intention is to divide the house into 2/3, 1/3. One of our gateway tenants will be in 2/3 of the house and have the option to let a third of the house out as a diversification project. So combined, we think that will give us a gross return of about 24,000 a year. We envisage, as part of diversification, having holiday accommodation, 2 units in the West Barn, at a conservative estimate but a realistic one, 6,000 a year each for those. A campsite, again, a reasonably conservative estimate, grossing 10,000 a year. We haven't looked at charged events and hiring for the West Barn. It's a substantial space. It's the old threshing barn. So we put that on the list, but we think it's an unknown return on that, and we'll just have to see where that goes. And it may not be something we do. It may be something the tenant does. The same for land-based activities like paid involvement of groups and things like that. Countryside stewardship, as I've already said, was giving us roughly, in terms of revenue, 130,000 a year. In terms of capital funding, unknown over the next 4 years, but in 2025, the current figure is about 90,000. That's for capital. Under landscape recovery, both revenue and capital are unknown. As I've said, we would expect them to be the equivalent of what we're getting in countryside stewardship, but hopefully more than that, and the aspiration is more. We're not sure about rent from a tenant grazier, because we're going to have a tenant already, and one of the gateway tenancies, but there may be room for an additional tenant there, or focus on grazing, but we're not sure how that would work. So let's not assume that as a revenue at this stage. Just to remind you, you've seen this diagram before several times, but just to remind you of how we see Driver delivering national park purposes. And for us, obviously, it goes back to delivering national park purposes. So fundamentally, it's about nature and people. We see Driver delivering on those, as the priority there. But of course, it's about landscape. Of course, it's about climate mitigation. Of course, it's about heritage, as our purposes. It goes back to our strategy, which is showing direction in the countryside, and leadership and direction in the countryside. Yes, it has to have an income dimension to it, and I hope the development phase will give us at the end of it not a business plan that's forecasting, but a business plan that shows you how the costings stack up there. And of course, food production is in there as well, but in the uplands, in the extreme uplands, food production is not the priority. It can never be, and never will be now, and never has been. So there is a working vision which, I know what happens when you put words up, so I'm not going to linger on this one. It is not a tablet of stone. It is, read it for yourselves in the paper. It is an evolving vision, and we're very happy to play with the words, but let's not do that today, if that's acceptable, Chairman. Likewise with comms, we've done an awful lot of comms in the last 12 months, and that just gives you an example of the kind of things that are going on. This will be a rolling comms plan, so we're not going to forecast what we're going to do in detail. This will roll forward as activities take place on the ground there. For example, next year when we recruit a tenant there, that would be an opportunity for an awful lot of comms, I would think, and be very surprised if we didn't do that. So it's those sort of things. It would be responsive. We're not reactive. We'll have a plan, but we'll roll it forward year on year. In terms of detail, I don't know how well you can see that. This is one of Julie's amazing drawings, and it sort of brings together what we're thinking at Driver, and this is with some of the consents that will be needed, but it shows you how we intend to use the building. So the house, as I've already said, will be split into a two-thirds third. Number 5 is the east barn, which has already been renovated, and the south end of that east barn, 7 and 8, will be visitor access, where people will be brought, where volunteers will be gathered, possibly where events can happen, smaller events. Number 4 is going to be all subject to consent. I've just said that once, but I'll say it again. Number 4 is going to be where loos and showers and that sort of thing will be provided, basic facilities. Number 3 and number 2 are holiday accommodation units, and number 1 is an event space. That's the old threshing barn. That gives you an idea of how we see the layout. The modern buildings, I might move forward actually, yes, take it upstairs there. When it comes to the modern buildings, just at the bottom of the left-hand image there, that modern building is coming down to be demolished in the next month or two. It's unfit for purpose, and that will be replaced, subject to consent, with a very informal parking area for about 30 cars. I think that's all I'm going to say on that one. Just in terms of outputs, by the end of the development phase, so we're all very clear about where we'll be. We will have a partner that will be midway through their tenancy pretty well by then, perhaps not quite midway, and that will be the first of one of these gateway tenancies. They will be living in part of the house at Driver. We'll have a landscape recovery scheme in place until 2046. We'll have completed by then, Pioneers end in December 2028, so we'll have completed the Pioneers programme with all those things it's going to deliver. We will diversify the traditional farm buildings, particularly the West Range, and that is dependent on external funding. So we don't have all the funding in place for that. We don't know how much it will cost at this stage, but over the next 12 months we will get together detailed costings and spec out what we want to do there. So the plans I showed you are just conceptual at this stage, really. The other thing, which is pretty fundamental to the whole enterprise, is by that stage we will also have a thoroughly tested business model, a road-tested business model, and be able to show how the finances stack up or otherwise. We will also have identified how we resource the operating model, because at the moment we're relying quite a lot on things like lottery-funded projects that are time-bound, and we've had inputs from FIPL, and we don't know what the future of FIPL is. So longer term, we need to look at how we will resource the operating model. Or rather, by the end of the development phase, we need to look at how we will resource the operating model in the longer term. And also a green travel plan there. Drivers remote, and if we want people coming, and we want that's part of how it will operate, we need to think about its remote location and access. That's it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive. But obviously got it. Thank you. Right, numbers. Laura.
Hi, thanks for that, Rob. Just a few things from me. I noticed you looked at, in the papers, you looked at different examples elsewhere in the country for this. So I wanted to ask the question about larger hire, whether that had been fully considered, like weddings, festivals, because obviously there's space there. And then also, as someone who comes and camps in Exmoor, that seems really cheap for camping. So just to check that you're benchmarking it sort of and pricing things competitively, because it could obviously lead us to more income. And then on the comms front, I just wanted to see if we were capturing video evidence of the whole project in progress, because it could be a really powerful case study at the end, especially if we're going to be thought leaders or we want to apply for more funding. if we don't have capacity to do that, when we did a big project at Durham Park, I just set up a really simple project log, and it's a really nice time capture of how that went for various different purposes. So yeah.
Yes, while the other members gathering their thoughts.
In terms of comms, yeah, I mean, Cara is absolutely marvellous. She's been out there gathering video imagery, and the Pioneers projects haven't started on the ground, but when they do, which will be this year, that's part of the brief, is to gather imagery, for the lottery more than anything, but obviously we'll benefit from that as well. So, and I suppose from my point of view, proving that you can deliver a driver will make it more attractive for other funders. So it's part of that evidence and part of that story, really. So yes, absolutely. In terms of camping, this is me just having a look around at what prices I could see. I think it's, as I've said, let's prove what the revenues can be by actually doing it. In terms of event hire, the driver is very remote, and it's got quite a difficult drive in. So we don't see large numbers of people arriving and blocking up the lanes and blocking up it's just very challenging. So we see it as perhaps quite a small offer. The threshing barn would be a marvellous building for that sort of fun. You could see 80 people, 100 people in there quite easily. I don't see big events happening there though, and you'll have seen on the revenue table that I haven't costed that because I think it's unlikely to be an aspect of it. But I'm not saying it wouldn't be. I'm not saying that couldn't happen. And a lot of this will depend partly on the aspiration of our tenant.
Thank you. Thank you. Maggie, I saw your hand.
Thank you for the paper. My head's whirring actually with the complexity of it because you've got so many different business lines running here. You've got camping, you've got the training, you've got tenants possibly there. And my struggle at the moment is how that all blends and fits together. I'm trying to think, if it was a working farm and you've got campers trolling across your farmyard and you've got students and people training there. I'm just trying to see how that all blends together. And my next question really is around sustainability in the longer term, and you've touched on that, understanding that some of the larger streams of funding there are time ending, they will not go on forever. And my second question was quite a lot of it's around that sort of looking after the land and getting the grants attached with that. But then I was trying to think, how does a tenant also make money and that becomes sustainable? And it's that whole picture of everything blending together I'm struggling a bit to see from the paper here. So I hope that makes sense.
I think we're all struggling with various strands of this, and particularly unknowns in it. So we've gradually been able to pin down some of the unknowns. The big one is landscape recovery. And in truth, we won't know what the maths is like in terms of the options or in terms of what the potential revenue and capital payments are until probably at the end of this year, December at the earliest. And that is why we are delaying the decision on a tenant until second half of 2026, because we have to know what the potential is in the land of driver, both in terms of revenue and capital, and then how that stacks up financially with the tenant. So traditionally in the landlord-tenant relationship, the tenant might have benefited from the entire scheme, and that was the position of driver previously. Now, we're in a different world now, and I'm not sure that's a financial arrangement that we as an organisation would be comfortable with. And also, it bears on the amount of rent you're charging the tenant. So we want to be in possession of all the facts before we go into a relationship with what is a relatively short-term tenancy. So that we need to be clear about basically who gets what is it reasonable for the tenant to have and for us to have. And we can't do that until the end of this year, until we know.
Can I follow up? Yes. Allow me, thank you. Yeah, and I suppose my second question is, if someone came to me with this as a business plan, I'd say, wow, what are you going to focus on? There's too much here to be doing. So, you know, initially you're talking about camping, you know, people need to be received, money collected, advertised. You know, that's a business of itself. You know, who do you envisage in the short term will actually be running these things? I'm thinking about our officers and capacity, and are we going to be into the business of running a campsite that might detract from other projects we might want to put in?
So there are two aspects to this, I think. One is, without a tenant, that might be perhaps the tenant sees diversification, something they would want to do, and holiday lets the other half, the third of the house. So that could be something that's in their portfolio and not in ours. If it was in ours, we already take bookings at Pinkery, we already have cleaners and things at Pinkery. So we already have a setup, an administrative setup at Pinkery that does Pinkery. Doesn't do driver at the moment because there's nothing there. But potentially that could be added onto that. So there's a lot that's going to fall into place over the next 12 months from now. And that's why we see this as a development phase in a sense, because some things might not work. It will depend a lot on the aspiration of our tenant and how they see it. We've changed subtly. You asked a question in December about skills. We've changed subtly from where we were last year, I think, because in a sense, what we want in a tenant is somebody who absolutely sees, it is absolutely aligned on our vision for driver, and completely aligned on it. It's not something that they're thinking that they might go along with this. This is something they've got to embrace. So it is a partnership between us and that individual for that relatively short period of time. So we will have a stake in the place, because I think last year we were talking about the logistical difficulties of almost, if the tenant does this and we do this, then where do you physically draw the line in the yard? You know, which building, who gets which building? We think that is less of an issue now, because it will be addressed in terms of the recruitment of the tenant, which won't happen until next year. They've got to be completely aligned with what we're doing.
Thank you. Right, I've got quite a few hands. That's only take two people at once now. So it's Robin, then Bill.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, yeah, thanks for this, Rob. Huge amount of work in this. As you say, developing plan really for the future. I mean, it is a huge opportunity, and I always saw drivers had to be virtually a binary choice. We either divested ourselves of the interest in it entirely and got rid of it, or if we were going to keep it, there's a huge amount to do and a huge amount of opportunity within it. We've gone for the latter, and I think hence the complexity of what we have there in what, if it was a normal tenanted farm, would be a relatively straightforward business plan. But it's not, because this is owned by the Exmoor National Park Authority, and this is an opportunity to link it directly with our national park purposes and actually put something out there into the public domain. This is where opportunities lie for land management, and an integrated land management that gives value for the future in a good many ways, as well as delivering against our purposes. So I absolutely get the complexity there when you look at every part of this and the opportunities within it. I think probably all that's there at the moment, and yes, I understand there's some complexities around planning, and I was looking at whether it be buildings or whether it be the campsite or whatever, because as an authority we have to get this absolutely right. There is no question about that, because we will be looked at very, very carefully on everything that we do there to make sure it hasn't transcended a single stone out of place in anyone else's eyes of planning. I think when it comes to the latter stages and we're looking for that tenant, I think therein lies some huge opportunities for us, because I expect a good many people have seen the National Trust and the televised approach for their choosing tenants and so on. I'm not suggesting we go down that route, but it would be quite nice to be able to make something really of value of how we choose a tenant and how we actually end up working with them. And I think there's some comms challenges, but there's some huge opportunities here. It probably links into some of the discussions we're having about how we work with the local community as well. because I'll be realistic, and I suspect there'll be quite a challenge to find a local person to go in there. Quite frankly, there'll be a lot of applicants, I would suspect, and we will have to manage really carefully how we choose to ensure it's not felt like we're being anti-local or anti the established farming systems on Exmoor when we do it. But I think the opportunities to get it right considerably outweigh that. You know, the local community will be appraising every bit of this when you get to that stage. To some extent, having a time scale that's probably longer than I would really like, and probably longer than you would like. It'd be quite nice to think you could telescope the delivery of all of this into the next year, but it's not going to happen, is it, Rob? It's not possible. So, yes, absolutely support this. Understand. I think there's some areas that we can develop greater opportunities for both Exmoor and for the management of land in that kind of upland scenario, and use it to our benefit. On that basis, yeah, I'll move the recommendation too.
Thank you very much. Bill, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really impressive and vision of what you've done with Driver, but it's not going to be a farmstead. It's not going to be a place for animals. So I think Mandy pointed that out. I just wonder how you're going to separate you need to separate the agricultural side of it, or the farming side, from this side somehow. So I'm not sure how a tenancy will work unless there's a gradient type, because you'll need somebody who's going to cut, somebody's going to have grading pressure on. If you're running a CS scheme, I'm presuming under the latest, you need somebody with enough stock and enough flexibility to manage it and possibly building somewhere. So I just wonder how, once this, I know you've got a shed there that may be built, but there won't be one in the short term. I just wonder how a tenant, particularly somebody who's only coming for 5 to 7 years, is going to set up, they say, small herd of cattle and a flock of hefted sheep. It's just not going to happen. So you actually need somebody who can exert grading pressure. I mean, regenerative farming is not about letting stuff grow up. It's about working. It's about taking it off. It's about managing it. You know, and I just think maybe you need to really think about how that's going to work going forward. I mean, it's very exciting. I'm not against what you're doing to Driver, but it's not going to be a farmstead or a farm anymore. You need to think, I think, how you're going to manage it other than with a grader. I think it's going to be difficult to find a tenant who would commit to a short term and also everything you want to do. So good luck with that, but I think that would be where my concern is, looking at the agricultural side. I'd also add that regen, you know, you do produce food. Regenerative farming produces a lot of food, but it's just the way it does it. And anybody, Adam's not here, he's a great regenerative farmer, as am I, and we can produce food, but the idea is to do it working with the land. So, great, want to see it up there, that's fine, but I don't see quite how it's going to work in with the core business, which is going to be the farms. So, that's my call. Sorry, I put my microphone on either.
No, I just realised that. I just got sorry, I should have nudged you.
Try again.
No, we don't have the time. Did you want to come back on that?
Can I? Yes, thank you. We had in the table I showed you, there was the possibility of a grazier, a second grazier, a tenant and grazier separate. I think that's problematic in terms of how you divide things up, but we've left it in as an option. We're not envisaging the tenant being a start-up. It's not that kind of tenancy because it's a lot of land. We're also envisaging an awful lot of interventions on the ground, so not hands-off at all. So the slide that related to the partnership plan talks about a lot of intervention. Even if on some of the land you're going for natural processes, you do have to reset the land. So we do see things like peatland restoration being done. We've got some of the deepest peat on Exmoor on Driver, and it's not restored. It hasn't been restored yet, areas of it. So there's an awful lot of nature projects to deliver up there, in addition to the Pioneers ones. Yes, we do see food production, but it's 800 acres, and you know you're not going to produce in the uplands. You're not going to be producing masses and masses of food. Of course, it's going to be part of the story there, but it's not the big bubble in the middle, if you like. This is about nature and people. And in terms of the pharmacy, yes, we have identified a general purpose building there, but until we know what's required, and until we understand better what landscape recovery is offering, what kind of tenancy we're looking at in detail, that is just a concept. That's just conceptual. That building that is a better site than the current one for a large agricultural building, but it may not necessarily be there. But if it were to be there, that is the site where we go for.
Right, Bill, are you
Can
going to
I
second it?
briefly come back and I'm happy to second it, but I just wanted to say, I was thinking about livestock, the importance of livestock on the moor. I think both for, it's what people expect to see, but also it's what's produced. So, if it's not there, people are going to ask the question, why not? So I'm not suggesting we should be doing. It was a lot of arable land there when it was first set up. They grew corn and so forth. But I'm not suggesting go to that. But
no,
I think in livestock. Livestock, you need somewhere to winter them unless they're very hardy. If they're very hardy, they're probably hefted. Whose are they?
Livestock are a requirement of the SSSI description, so it's not an option.
Okay, next to Marcus and Susan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's fun. I love where you're going with it. I think for me, the only thing we've been a lot of talk about the tenant, and I can't say too much about the farming side of things. It's enough. But with regard to on the accommodation side of things, of course, if the tenant's not directly involved with that, accommodation is sort of ever more review led, and if you get a tenant in there who, isn't as hospitality friendly as maybe, I'm not saying that farmers may not be as hospitality friendly, but I've got a note here, tongue in cheek, are we going to allow dogs in the accommodation? But no, it's just I'm going to go home and shoot my dogs after what Robin said earlier on anyway, I think. Bless them, I said that tongue in cheek. Yeah, but very quickly added. But yeah, so how do we make sure that they're engaged? You mentioned it, but people can turn up and talk a good game, and then when it actually gets down to the nitty gritty of it actually happening, and suddenly they get, and obviously who's going to book this accommodation, what demographic will they come from, and which is the best one to have and which isn't. And could that become a problem where actually we see revenue dropping because we got lack of control on, and I don't want to use the word attitude, but I think it may have to, the attitude of the tenant to people turning up from Surrey or somewhere else, like, I don't know. I do Surrey, Hampshire, Hertfordshire, is that place?
Many counties are available.
Yeah. Or then someone turning up from Birmingham or Grimsby. I'll get a little plug in for the Great North there as well. And how we manage that, because it could be, looking at our budget, it could be quite vital. Every little bit could count, and just making sure that they're fully engaged and that we trust them with which could be our guests, if that makes sense. I think I've said that in the right way.
I'm just going to go to Susan now. You've been covered, brilliant. Top member there. Fran.
Thank you. I think it kind of follows on a little bit from what Marcus was saying, but I was thinking if we got a good tenant in there and they're limited to the 5 to 7 years, do they have that opportunity to extend it? Because it could be they're absolutely ideal, do have the right attitude, doing everything, and they want to do more and they want to stay. Could there be that opportunity to do the 10, 15, 20 years? They could have a young family and that would be the right sort of span of time. So I just wanted to say, could we have that as a kind of clause to extend it, or is there a benefit or not a benefit to doing that? But equally, we need, if we get the wrong person in there, to be able to say, we need someone different.
So I think the beauty of a short-term one is that you have the option either way. But it's got to work for both parties. And that's the difference from what we had previously. In terms of Marcus, I think all I can say is that colleagues have done a pretty wonderful job on recruiting, going through the recruitment process for the new tenant at the North Hill campsite. and I think we have quite a lot of expertise in here in terms of recruitment. We're not saying this isn't going to be a challenge, but when I said earlier we want a tenant or driver who absolutely shares our values up there, that's going to be part of the recruitment. That's going to be a huge part of the recruitment.
Andrew?
Thank you, Rob. Tongue in cheek a little bit. If dogs are going to be allowed, I hope bikes are going to be allowed as well. No, more important point. A lot of uncertainty, you say, Rob, and there's lots here, and we're obviously being asked to approve it until 2028. And when do you see you're going to be able to start to put a programme plan together, as you call it a programme, times and dates? I know there's uncertainty, but sometimes you've got to go for it and make assumptions. And again, would that then report it back to us? Okay.
This is an outline Gantt chart,
yes,
and needs a lot more work on this,
yes,
a lot more filling in. But it was, I wasn't going to use it, but it is to show that we actually start to almost immediately start effectively on some bits, because it's not, we scoop things into the development phase like Pioneers. So Pioneers began in February. But a lot of it's consent dependent, but this is very high level, and I wasn't going to crack it out this morning.
No, I can see that's the next phase, isn't it? Having something like that which we have visibility of, I guess.
And the idea is that when Andrew reports yearly on work done and work to do on the estate, drive will be scooped up in that now.
Okay.
So the development phase will be reported on, subject to your approval today, will be reported on annually.
Obviously that point, we talked about 800,000, didn't we, coming this way, and that's going to be picked up in the same plan, I guess. Yeah. And one other final thing, I mean...
No, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to be really strict. You turn your microphone off. Sorry, you've had your chance. 3 times you've come back. That's got to be strict. Right, got the 2 Jeremys, and then we're going to go to vote. Jeremy Youngson.
This one first. So
Yeah. Your hand first.
Thank you, Chairman. Well done, Rob. Super job. Just the only gap for me is the one raised by my farming colleagues. I'm concerned if you are thinking about how you're going to, it's a large area of grassland, and I'm sure I'll be put right if I'm not right. But you can either graze it. If you don't graze it, you've got to cut it or top it and manage it, so you'll have quite a lot of haylage or whatever coming off. That could be your crop. But if you're going to graze it, the grazier will need handling facilities. If you're going to overwinter, you'll need overwintering facilities. But your tenant on this sort of property, this sort of area, this sort of grazing, this sort of height of ground, low numbers probably of livestock. And so if you're going to maximise your income, they would probably want to sell their own product, because that's what it is, for boxed meat and all those sorts of things. Bill, you jut in if you like, but that is...
Sorry, no.
If you're doing a big you know, if you've got to bring a lot of cattle on, or a lot of sheep on, to try and manage that grazing, and it'll have to be around what we want managed in a specific way, so that could be fencing, temporary fencing possibly, but it's quite a big thing to get a tenant to come in and say, I can do that, and I'll pay you that if you let me do it. 5 years seems a long time. 7 years, it's not very long if you are setting up a business, if it's not already, the handling system's not there. Sheep you can bring in, so a mobile system outdoors, but I think you're just not thinking about it. It's not on your plan, and it seems to me to be quite a big part of the whole thing. I just sort of think there's a gap there. Not criticism, other than I want you to think about it.
Do you want to come back now?
No.
Okay. Right, other Jeremy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The partnership plan hasn't been mentioned. This fits in glove with the partnership plan. It's an absolute gift of delivering
and partnership plan. The other point I wanted to make was I think this is an opportunity to have an exemplar unit, to be a demonstration unit. But part of being an exemplar and a demonstration unit is making sure people understand the discussion that's gone on before we got there. So I think we should be disseminating this thought process to the public so that they get the major benefit of it, and people who are trying to make decisions long term for their holdings know the kind of thinking that's gone on here. I know we're involved in the landscape recovery with lots of local farmers, and we should be telling people in our partnership plan that we are engaged with lots of local farmers at this landscape recovery plan, and that is part of our decision-making process going forward, just so that the public get the maximum benefit, and the people who are paying farmers know what the farmers are doing here, and that it's for purposes of the partnership plan, even if it is those farmers we're engaging with, and I'm sorry I'm being a bit sort of wobbly about this, but they are also they can be brought along with this and understand the thinking behind it and the outcomes that it's going to be delivered.
Okay, I see no more hands. Ross, will you take any further questions that you might want to go into more detail? Is it acceptable if members contact you outside of this?
Of course, yeah.
Brilliant. I think that's the way to go with the detail that we're keen on the last stage, yeah. So the farmers have got all their opinions, bring you just in expertise, you can share that somewhere else, but okay, I've got a proposer and a seconder, I have no more hands. All those in favour? Anybody against? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on. So I have been notified of no member reports. Obviously, we've all been in pre-election period anyway. So that's the end of that one. And then I need a mover to item 12 to go into confidential business. Thank you, John. Have a second. Oh, there's also all those in favour? Thank you. Right, we're moving into confidential session. So to conclude the meeting, we need to go back into part 8. John, can you propose? Yeah.